It is with great pleasure that my wife and I welcome you to Windsor Castle on this, your second state visit to the United Kingdom. This relationship, which, with good reason...
Imagine dedicating 6 full months to planning a single dinner, not because the cuisine is exceptionally complex, though it undoubtedly is, but because every single seat at the table must be negotiated, debated, and finalized with the exact precision of a bilateral peace treaty. This is the reality behind a British state banquet, one of the strangest, most quietly tense, and meticulously choreographed traditions remaining in modern royal life. On paper, a state banquet seems entirely straightforward. A foreign head of state visits Britain, and the monarch hosts a grand, glittering dinner in their honor. But behind that deceptively simple premise lies a logistical and diplomatic machine that remains largely invisible to the public eye. Preparations begin at Buckingham Palace in London, or occasionally at Windsor Castle in Berkshire if the visiting dignitaries are staying with the monarch. The immense organizing work falls to the master of the household and a vast team of dedicated staff. According to royal household sources, these banquets require roughly 6 months of preparation. Even in the final stretch, it takes palace staff 3 full days just to lay the table. Every microscopic detail, down to the last fork and the angle of the wine glass, is treated with paramount importance. In this rarefied world, these details genuinely matter. To understand the scale of this operation, one must first look at the physical elements of the banquet, starting with the table itself. The Buckingham Palace ballroom can accommodate around 170 diners, the exact number seated during the state banquet held in honor of President Donald Trump in 2019. Meanwhile, Windsor Castle's St. George's Hall, reserved for the grandest and most historic occasions, can fit up to 160 guests at a stretch. The table is traditionally arranged in a horseshoe shape, a configuration chosen for its optical and conversational advantages. The open design allows the monarch, seated at the center of the head table, to see every guest, and more importantly, allows every guest to see the monarch. On the afternoon of the event, the monarch personally inspects the table. Walking its length alongside the master of the household, the sovereign checks for flawless execution. The precision required is staggering. Each place setting includes 6 glasses, 1 for water, 1 for champagne, 1 each for red and white wine, 1 for dessert wine, and 1 for port. Up to a dozen pieces of cutlery are laid out with near mathematical precision. But this is not just any cutlery. It is often the grand service, an extraordinary collection of silver-gilt dining pieces first commissioned by King George IV in the early 19th century. Comprising over 4,000 individual pieces, the service is so vast and valuable that it requires a dedicated team of yeomen and footmen to clean, polish, and count every single item before and after use. Not one piece can be misplaced, and not one fingerprint can be left visible. Footmen use measuring sticks, often specifically designed rulers, to ensure the exact distance between each chair and the table edge matches flawlessly, typically spaced at 46 centimeters. The napkins are folded into intricate traditional designs, such as the Dutch bonnet, ensuring they stand uniformly without obscuring the guest's face. It sounds excessively rigid until you realize the room's true purpose. This is not a family dinner. It is a stage, and the setting is the foundation of the performance. This brings us to the most crucial element of the evening, the aspect that actually matters most, the seating plan. Unlike the table settings, which are dictated by tradition, the seating chart is the result of active, high-level diplomatic negotiation. For the proposed state banquet for President Trump scheduled for September 2025 at Windsor Castle, the palace drafted the initial layout. However, this draft was not simply finalized in-house. It was shown to both the British government and the White House for review before King Charles and Queen Camilla gave their final absolute approval. In essence, the seating chart is as much a diplomatic document as it is a party planning tool. It is an agreement forged between 2 sovereign nations before a single guest is permitted to take their seat. The placements that emerge from these intense negotiations tell you exactly how the protocol operates. At the 2025 Windsor banquet, the king sat at the center of the horseshoe, flanked by the visiting head of state and a key dignitary. In this instance, President Trump on one side and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the other. The Princess of Wales was strategically positioned beside President Trump, ensuring a senior, globally recognized royal was engaged in direct conversation with the primary guest. Queen Camilla entered the hall alongside First Lady Melania Trump, followed by the Prince of Wales, creating a visual procession of intertwined Anglo-American alliance. Even guests who were not part of the official government parties are placed with clear, deliberate intent. Media mogul Rupert Murdoch, for example, was positioned on the same side of the table as the King and the Prince of Wales. However, he was deliberately situated well down the row to their left, seated between the Prime Minister's chief of staff and his own wife. Nothing in this arrangement is random. Every seat communicates a distinct message of rank, relationship, political alignment, or cultural influence, whether the observing public consciously notices it or not. This is the core purpose of royal seating protocol, to make hierarchy visible without a single word being spoken. For centuries, seating arrangements in royal courts across Europe have been used to broadcast power, favor, and alliance in ways that rhetoric simply cannot achieve. A physical seat cannot be debated or spun like a spoken sentence. Its location is an undeniable, physical fact. The fundamental rule has remained remarkably consistent across history and across different monarchies. The highest-ranking individuals sit closest to the host. At a British state banquet, this means the monarch and the visiting head of state are centrally positioned, surrounded by spouses, senior royals, and key diplomats in descending order of rank. The traditional zigzag seating arrangement is often employed, alternating British hosts with foreign guests to encourage cross-cultural conversation. However, exceptions are frequently made for the sovereign to ensure they sit directly beside the guest of honor. It is a silent, physical declaration of who holds the most significance in the room, reiterated every single time the table is set. Because the stakes are largely symbolic rather than physical, even minor deviations from this established protocol become highly significant. A notable, modern example involves the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. According to former royal butler Grant Harold, they broke with a long-standing dining tradition by choosing to sit next to each other at a formal event, rather than adhering to the strict custom of separating couples around the table. This custom was designed to keep conversation flowing between different guests, preventing cliques and encouraging social and political mingling. While their decision seemed trivial to the outside world, inside the royal ecosystem, it was noticed, commented upon, and remembered. This highlights a crucial dynamic of royal life. In this environment, breaking the seating plan is treated not as a logistical slip, but as a breach of an unspoken agreement regarding how the institution presents itself to the world. Beyond the seating, a myriad of other rules govern the evening, ranging from the highly practical to the almost theatrical. The pacing of the meal is entirely dictated by the monarch. Once the sovereign finishes eating, every other guest at the table is expected to cease eating immediately, regardless of how far through their plate they might be. The psychological pressure of this rule is immense. Guests must learn to pace their bites to align with the monarch's appetite, ensuring they do not leave the table hungry, nor linger over a finished plate. The kitchen operates under its own strict code of conduct. Garlic is famously, albeit unofficially, banned from the royal menus. The idea is to ensure that breath remains entirely fresh through the long sequence of formal handshakes, close conversations, and receiving lines that inevitably follow the meal. Strong, pungent ingredients, like onions and certain shellfish, are also frequently avoided to minimize any risk of food-related illness or social awkwardness during the high-stakes evening. The menu itself is a masterpiece of culinary diplomacy. Drafted months in advance by the royal chefs, the menu is designed to showcase the very best of British seasonal produce, perhaps Welsh lamb, Scottish salmon, or game from the royal estates at Balmoral or Sandringham. However, it must also take into account the dietary restrictions, allergies, and cultural sensibilities of the visiting head of state and their delegation. A menu must be exquisite, but it must never be accidentally offensive. Once finalized, it is printed on bespoke, gilt-edged cards and placed at each setting, often bearing the heraldic crests of both nations. Orgies are another area where control is paramount. Before a single word is spoken into the microphone, the speeches are drafted, checked, and approved by the Foreign, Commonwealth, and Development Office. Diplomatic experts scrutinize the texts line by line to ensure that nothing said publicly, even in jest. The evening traditionally concludes with a moment of pure, historical theatricality. 12 pipers from the Royal Regiment of Scotland march around the room, playing a series of traditional Scottish tunes. This tradition traces its origins back to Queen Victoria, who had a deep affection for Scottish culture. The piercing sound of the bagpipes echoing through the vaulted ceilings of St. George's Hall serves as a majestic, unmissable signal that the evening has drawn to a close, prompting the guests to rise and make their way to the drawing rooms for coffee and final farewells. None of this prioritizes the comfort of the guests or even the hosts. It prioritizes absolute control. The goal is to ensure that an evening involving hundreds of guests, multiple governments, vast culinary operations, and centuries of heavy tradition unfolds without a single visible flaw. This begs an interesting question. What happens when things go slightly wrong? Despite months of meticulous planning, royal events are run by human beings, and human beings are fallible. However, if one were to search for a record of a young royal child being placed in the wrong seat at a recent state banquet, they would find nothing. This is largely because young children are entirely absent from the formal seating charts of state banquets. This begs an interesting question. What happens when things go slightly wrong? Despite months of meticulous planning, royal events are run by human beings, and human beings are fallible. However, if one were to search for a record of a young royal child being placed in the wrong seat at a recent state banquet, they would find nothing. This is largely because young children are entirely absent from the formal seating charts of state banquets. State banquets are adult diplomatic forums, built specifically around heads of state, ambassadors, government ministers, and senior working royals who already hold established public roles. Younger royal children generally take part in different kinds of appearances, things like royal tours, public engagements timed precisely to their ages, or family-centric events like weddings or trooping the color. Their introduction to public duty happens gradually through carefully chosen, age-appropriate appearances, rather than through high-stakes events built for matters of state. This gradual introduction is itself a kind of protocol, even if it is rarely written down in any official household manual. Royal observers have long noted that the Prince and Princess of Wales have taken a noticeably careful, highly strategic approach to how their children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, appear in public. They choose moments that match their ages, protecting them from the overwhelming scrutiny of the global press rather than rushing them into adult settings. It is part of the reason why younger royals are seen at family-friendly, sporting, or charitable events long before they are ever seen at events built around foreign policy and tense diplomatic negotiations. The pacing is deliberate, almost fiercely protective, a way of letting the public get used to a child's presence over years rather than thrusting them into the spotlight all at once. What is undeniably true, and well documented, is that the tension around visibility and prominence among senior royals is entirely real. This tension has surfaced publicly more than once, particularly around questions of who stands where, who walks with whom, who speaks, and who gets the most attention at major events. These moments tend to get heavily magnified by the media because every public appearance by a senior royal is treated as a kind of definitive statement, whether anyone inside the palace intended it that way or not. A seating chart, a walking order, even who arrives alongside whom in a motorcade, all of it gets read and decoded by royal watchers, historians, and political analysts as a signal about internal family standing and future strategy. This is not unique to any single event or any particular generation of royals. It is baked into the very DNA of how this institution communicates itself to the public. It is a tradition spanning generations, going back centuries, long before any of today's working royals were even born. The British monarchy learned long ago that silence and placement speak louder than press releases. So, the next time you see a photograph from a state banquet, the long table glittering with gold cutlery, the floral arrangements towering perfectly, and the orchestra tucked quietly into the corner, it is worth remembering the immense machinery operating beneath that polished surface. 6 months of planning, a seating chart negotiated between two sovereign governments, measuring sticks used to space the chairs down to the centimeter, speeches scrutinized line by line by the Foreign Office, thousands of pieces of historical silver gilt counted and polished to a blinding shine. None of it is an accident, and very little of it is left to chance. The grandeur is real, but so is the grueling, rigid system behind it. An entire architecture of protocol designed to ensure that when the cameras finally turn on and the doors swing open, everything looks exactly the way it was always meant to. That, more than any single dramatic moment or high-profile guest, is the real story of a British state banquet. It is not merely about one chair, one menu, or one potential mistake. It is about an institution that has spent centuries mastering the art of turning a dinner into a powerful diplomatic message and ensuring that message is delivered flawlessly, every single time.